Hey there, friend. Welcome back to the YouTube channel for the Renaissance English History Podcast. I am your host, Heather. I've been podcasting on Tudor England since 2009 with my show, which makes it the original OG Tudor History Podcast. This channel, of course, is where I put all of my episodes from all of my shows, as well as tons of extra content like this video right here. Today, we are going to talk about Sanctuary and Queen Elizabeth Woodville. So yesterday's Tudor Minute, I think it was yesterday, was about the death of Elizabeth Woodville. And I was thinking about Elizabeth Woodville being in Sanctuary. And, that's something that, of course, shows up in all the historical fiction and all of the books about her. She actually even gave birth in Sanctuary. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what Sanctuary was in the Middle Ages, as well as Elizabeth Woodville's specific experience with Sanctuary at Westminster Abbey. So let's get right into it. Before we get started, though, if you would like to see more Tudor history in your YouTube feed and you don't already subscribe, why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss a video like this that I put out. All right, so the concept of sanctuary in the Middle Ages conjures up very dramatic images. Desperate fugitives pounding on church doors and clergy throwing open the gates just in time, royal soldiers fuming outside. But sanctuary wasn't just for common criminals or political rebels. Sometimes queens themselves fled to the safety of the sacred walls, and that's exactly what Elizabeth Woodville did twice. The wife of Edward IV, the mother of the Princess in the Tower, found herself holed up in Westminster Abbey, dragging in her children, her belongings, and a frankly absurd amount of treasure. So what exactly was sanctuary? How did it work? And what happened when the Queen of England turned up at the Abbey door? In medieval England, sanctuary was a legal right that was rooted in religious tradition. A person accused of a crime could claim protection by fleeing to a church or a religious house. Once inside, they were untouchable for a while. The idea was that the church offered time and space to negotiate, repent, or in some cases, escape justice entirely. The standard term of protection was for 40 days, during which time the fugitive could either face trial or agree to leave the kingdom. That was how it was supposed to work, at least. But like many medieval customs and even laws today, enforcement varied wildly depending on who you were, who was after you, and whether the political situation made you convenient or expendable. Sanctuary could be respected or it could be trampled. A prime example of that came after the Battle of Tewkesbury in 1471, when Edward IV's men violated the sanctuary of Tewkesbury Abbey to drag out and execute Lancastrian leaders who were hiding inside. Even the sacred space of the church couldn't always protect you from royal anger. So when Elizabeth Woodville fled to Westminster Abbey in 1483, when her husband died, she was relying not just on a legal protection, but on the prestige and the political weight of the Abbey itself, thinking that people would be less likely to violate the political sanctuary of the Abbey versus Tewkesbury Abbey. Westminster Abbey versus Tewkesbury Abbey, which one are you going to violate sanctuary of? That's what she was thinking, in part. Westminster Abbey wasn't just any church. It had been a site of royal coronations and burials for centuries. Its abbots were powerful, its privileges were firmly defended, and its sanctuary rights were particularly strong. The Abbey precinct included several buildings. Among them was the Abbot's House complex, which included the Cheyneygates, a comfortable, even luxurious residence that overlooked the great cloister. Cheyneygates wasn't a deep medieval crypt or anything like that, despite what certain TV dramatizations would have you believe. I'm looking at you, the White Queen. This was no dungeon. It was a well-appointed house within a powerful monastic community. Elizabeth wasn't scuttling off to hide in rags in the basement cellar somewhere. She was seeking a political cover, a place where she had strong ties and influence. Elizabeth Woodville's first retreat into sanctuary came during one of the most chaotic moments of the Wars of the Roses. In the autumn of 1470, her husband, Edward IV, was forced to flee the country after the temporary restoration of Henry VI, orchestrated by the Earl of Warwick and Margaret of Anjou. This is called the readoption of Henry VI. Elizabeth was really vulnerable now. She was alone in London, she was pregnant, and her enemies were back in power. On October 1st, she took sanctuary in Westminster Abbey, accompanied by her 3 daughters and her mother, Cheyneygates of Luxembourg. Her older son, Edward, the future Edward V, the Prince in the Tower, he was probably with his father at this point, taken away for safety. So she knew that this was about her survival, really, and that her enemies probably wouldn't hesitate to remove her entirely if they got the chance. She stayed at Westminster for several months, and on November 2nd, 1470, she gave birth to a son. The child was christened there with some ceremony, though not the usual fanfare that a royal birth might warrant under better circumstances. The second flight to sanctuary came more than a decade later and under even more dangerous circumstances. In April 1483, Edward IV died suddenly. Their oldest son, Edward V, was the new king, but still a young boy. Elizabeth and her Woodville relatives tried to control the succession, but Richard, Duke of Gloucester, moved swiftly. He seized the young king, arrested Elizabeth's brother, Anthony Woodville, and her son, Richard Grey, her son by her first marriage, and made it very clear that he was taking charge. Elizabeth didn't wait. She gathered her remaining children. She fled across the road into sanctuary at Westminster Abbey again, not just in the main church, but specifically in Cheyneygates, the mansion attached to the abbot's house. Thomas More's account paints the scene in almost slapstick chaos. Carts loaded with treasure, servants rushing around, walls broken through to allow trunks to make it through. The Bishop of Rotherham even delivered the Great Seal of England to her, only to regret it the next day and send someone to take it back. She remained in Cheyneygates for months. It wasn't a dungeon, like we said, though later dramatizations like The White Queen imagined her languishing in some damp cellar. Cheyneygates was spacious, it was comfortable, it was even borderline luxurious. One upstairs chamber was still known centuries later as My Lady's bedchamber, probably hers. Eventually, she made a wary reconciliation with Richard III and allowed her daughters to leave sanctuary and join his household. This has kept historians speculating for 500 years about whether or not Richard could have killed the princes in the tower. If she believed that Richard had actually killed the princes in the tower, would she have allowed her daughters to go join his household? And there have been so many books written about that for the past 500 years, and it kind of adds to that intrigue over whether or not Richard did kill the princes. But that is a different story. I'm not going to talk about that today. After Richard III's fall and her daughter's marriage to Henry VII, Elizabeth Woodville's fortune seemed briefly to stabilize. In 1486, she secured a formal lease on Cheyneygates, the same residence where she had once taken sanctuary. The lease was for 40 years, granting her the use of the mansion attached to the abbot's house, complete with chambers, outbuildings, and all of the comforts expected of a former queen. The language of the lease is revealing. It acknowledged her past generosity to the abbot during Edward IV's reign and required her to maintain the property, including clearing out the drains and keeping up the roof. It wasn't exile, it was a dignified retirement, in theory. Conveniently located across from Westminster Palace, it also allowed her to remain close to her daughter, now Queen Elizabeth of York. But the peace didn't last, of course. Henry VII, ever cautious and suspicious of her Yorkist loyalties, soon removed her from court life. Whether it was political caution or personal distrust, or she just really wanted to go, the result was the same. She was quietly sent or moved to or left to Bermondsey Abbey, a respectable but isolated residence for a woman who had once been the very center of power. She died there in 1492 in reduced circumstances. Her will mentions little wealth or property, from a throne to a cloistered religious house. That old medieval wheel of fortune had spun once again. Cheyneygates was later renamed the Deanery after the Reformation. Ultimately, it was destroyed in the Blitz in 1941. Today, little remains except old floor plans, a few crumbling photos, and the memories baked into the cloisters of Westminster Abbey. But Elizabeth Woodville's story lingers. Twice she fled to that space. First, as a pregnant queen consort abandoned politically while her husband was in exile, and again 13 years later as the mother of a deposed boy king, with her enemies closing in. Sanctuary wasn't just a legal technicality for her. For Elizabeth, it was a place of real consequence. A place to give birth, a place to defend her children, a place to plot, panic, and hold fast, while all of England's future played out just beyond the cloister walls. So there you have it, a little bit on Sanctuary, Elizabeth Woodville, her experience of sanctuary. And yeah. So happy Monday, you guys. I wanted to show you the t-shirt that I'm wearing today because the other day I showed you my Lord of the Rings one. This is I solemnly swear I am up to no good, which is what the Marauders map in Harry Potter says. So this is a Harry Potter t-shirt. So, I can love both Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. The two aren't mutually exclusive. There was a period in my life where I thought that Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter had to be like mutually exclusive of each other. And if you liked one, you couldn't like the other. I think I was influenced by a South Park episode on that. If you haven't seen the South Park episode where they're returning the one video, I mean, it's hugely inappropriate. I can't show it to my daughter, but it was really hilarious. Came out like 2003 or something. I remember watching it and thinking it was the funniest thing ever. Anyway, I think that episode influenced me into thinking that I couldn't like both Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, but they're just different. And as I get older, I realize that my capacity to like different things that might seem conflicting actually grows bigger, and it's possible to hold two contradictory thoughts at the same time. So that's my meditation on aging. Anyway, if you made it to the end of this video and you liked it, I sure would appreciate a press of that like button. It helps to feed that algorithm and get our content to even more people. I hope I earned your subscription to my channel where I put out videos like this on the regular. If you want to keep binging Elizabeth Woodville content, here is a video on Elizabeth's life in retirement. You might enjoy that. Or here's one that YouTube thinks you'll like. Thanks so much for being here. Remember, you are deeply loved. I am so glad I shared the planet with you. I will be back very, very soon. Don't forget to drink your water. All right. Bye-bye.